Kaffir by Mark Mathabane is an autobiographical novel describing the author's hardships growing up under the strict laws of apartheid as a black boy in South Africa. Apartheid was a system that enforced the segregation of black and white people, the word literally meaning apartness. Mark and many other children in his situation is born into a life of filth and strife in a ghetto called Alexandra, a place created by the South African government to promote this notion of apartheid. Mark himself introduces readers to Alexandra, saying, Alexandra's streets were filled with black faces, many of them black as coal, full-blooded Africans. Many of these blacks were as poor as church mice. In South Africa, there's a saying that is to be black is to be at the end of the line, when anything of significance is to be had. This place is characterized by the blacks who live there and the poor treatment by the whites of these people. Many of these black people and families were crammed into this ghetto, complete with poor housing, little food, high unemployment rates, and oppressive police. Kaffir is the story of Mark's experiences under these conditions and how, through knowledge and extreme willpower, he rises above his oppressors and lives out his dreams in America. The novel begins in a horrific scene where Mark, or Johannes as he goes by as a child, is abruptly woken up in the middle of the night during a police raid. This is the first insight into Johannes' life and the true horrors of the system he lives under at only 5 years of age. The first few chapters set the scenery for Mark's story to take place, introducing loving characters like his mom, or bitter personalities such as his dad. The turning point in the novel comes at Johannes' decision to go back to school and stay enrolled. After his first day attending, he is convinced he doesn't want to go back until he arrives home and decides to stay in school, saying, My mother, on one side, illiterate but determined to have me drink, for better or for worse, from the well of knowledge. On the other side, my father, he too illiterate, yet determined to have me drink from the well of ignorance. Scarcely aware of the magnitude of the decision I was making, or rather the decision that was being emotionally thrusted upon me, I chose to fight on my mother's side, and thus my destiny was forever altered. His schooling opened many doors, eventually leading to his involvement in tennis and scholarships for higher education. Through his teenage years, tennis gets him through tournaments and clubs until he lands a scholarship in America. The last moments of the novel is Mark saying goodbye to his family, tearfully leaving behind his home country to seek out a better life. A huge theme that plays through Mark's story is the relationship between mother and son and the power of education. While Mark's mom is supposed to be the subordinate wife, she defies this stereotype, stepping outside her traditional role to support Mark and her other children as much as she can. She believes thoroughly in education, despite the fact that she never got one as a child. She is seen as the one who uplifts her son and ultimately is a huge reason for getting him to America in the first place. This plays out after a huge fight with Mark's father, in which she delivers a heartfelt monologue about the importance of education, saying, Why don't you want me to go to school, Mama? I asked, hoping that she might somehow clear up some of this confusion that was building in my mind. I want you to have a future, my child, my mother said. And contrary to what your father says, school is the only means to a future. I don't want you growing up to be like your father. The latter statement hit me like a bolt of lightning. It just about shattered every defense mechanism and every pretext I had against going to school. Your father didn't go to school, she continued, dabbing her puffed eyes to reduce the swelling with a piece of cloth dipped in warm water. That's why he's doing some of the bad things he's doing. Things like drinking, gambling, neglecting his family. He didn't learn how to read and write, therefore he can't find a decent job. Lack of any education has narrowly focused his life. He sees nothing beyond himself. He still thinks in the old tribal way and still believes that things should be as they were back in the old days when he was growing up as a tribal boy in Louis Tricarded. Though he's my husband and your father, he doesn't see any of that. In today's world, conditions in certain countries remain the same or eerily similar to Mark's own during apartheid South Africa. Syria in particular seems to be a major discussion in the world today as countries debate whether to accept refugees or not. In the article, Syria's civil war has spawned a huge mental crisis by Eric Pianin. Readers are introduced to a new issue that haunts these refugees, that being mental illness. In Kaffir Boy, one also gets to see the mental effect of people living in such conditions. The real threat of Johannes's mental health begins after he witnessed his first cold-blood murder at a young age. He is deeply scarred by this event and goes back to the corpse the next day, saying, "That afternoon, I went past the spot where the man had been killed. The corpse had been removed, but there were traces of dried blood on the ground. I shrank. That evening, the first of the nightmares about the incident began." This directly relates to the article when the author says, roughly half of the Syrian refugees in Germany have mental health issues. 70% say they witnessed violence, and half say they were victims of violence, according to a 2015 study by the German Federal Chamber of Psychotherapists. Johannes' state of depression begins directly after witnessing of his murder, proving that mental trauma and mental health have a direct relationship, especially with children. Even more than just children, everyone was affected, including the older generation, such as Johannes' dad. The author of the article seems to stress this, saying, generations of Syrians, from grandparents to young children, are trying to cope with post-traumatic stress disorder and acute depression under the most horrible conditions imaginable. The man did not have good coping methods, this being shown in his drinking and gambling. In one scene, Johannes reflects upon this, saying, even as he wasted away, trying desperately but in vain to establish order in the chaos of his life, he failed to realize, even in the slightest, that this chaos is partly his own creation. Johannes' father is a perfect example of how apartheid and other tragedies can wear a soul down to even its own self-destruction. The article does put an emphasis on children's reactions to tragedies, like the Syrian refugee crisis, saying, Omar Karapson, a Middle East and North Africa specialist at the World Bank who authored the Brooklands analysis, wrote that children and women in particular confront difficult vulnerabilities. People in Syria are subject to atrocities such as car bombings and random airstrikes at any moment, and this weighs down heavily on children. A lot of them tend to feel stuck in their situation, the same way Johannes feels when he goes through his phase of depression. This is reflected when he is about to kill himself, saying, "But that lone winter afternoon my fighting spirit had ebbed to an all-time low. Suffering seemed unconquerable. I became frustrated, embittered, and disillusioned about knocking at the doors of opportunity, which seemed to shut the harder and more persistently I knocked." Even at such a young age, children like him have the same thoughts and mindsets as they try to deal with their horrible situations.